Hello, and thank you for joining me on this video, Campylobacter. My name's Andy Bowles, and I'm a food lawyer. This is the 28th in a series of 100 videos on UK food law topics. And you may be watching this as part of our online training service, in which case there is a separate webinar, about an hour long, which goes into a bit more detail on this topic. You can also download some reference materials to accompany this. But you're also maybe watching this on our YouTube channel, and of course you're more than welcome to do so. Campylobacter is one of the food poisoning bacteria that is followed by the Food Standards Agency as being significant. It has it's from the genus Campylobacter, which means curved rod in Greek. Now, it's been relatively newly discovered. It was only first discovered sort of 60 years ago, which I suppose is relatively new in microbiology, but only properly described as a food poisoning microorganism during the 1970s. There are two main species. There's Campylobacter jejuni and Campylobacter coli. It's the jejuni that is actually the most significant in terms of illness. So what are the growth characteristics of Campylobacter? Well, you'll see from that big arrow on the screen behind me, it's capable of growth up until about optimal growth, up to about 42 degrees centigrade, so between 30 and 42. Once you get above that temperature, Campylobacter is easily killed by normal catering temperatures, very easily killed. So thermal processing of food will wipe out Campylobacter, but it can survive at low temperatures. It doesn't really grow. It won't grow in refrigerated food. It certainly won't grow in frozen food, but it will survive in both environments. It prefers a sort of neutral pH environment, but is, again, not really able to grow in salted foods. So where does it come from? Well, Campylobacter is an environmental pathogen. In other words, it's a bacteria that causes illness that's found pretty much everywhere, all over the place. I mean, it's really mainly found in sort of the gut of birds, goats, sheep, cattle, swine. So because it's found in guts of animals, then obviously it'll be found in their feces and therefore in the soil. You'll find it in untreated water. Campylobacter can be contracted from drinking from sort of open water. If you go camping and you decide to go and take a drink out of the local brook or something like that. If you've got animals grazing nearby, well then there is a potential for Campylobacter infection. Also from things like raw milk. But the most likely source of Campylobacter food poisoning is from poultry. And there's been lots of studies over the years. Retail contaminated poultry has been a significant source of the food-borne Campylobacter food poisoning. How much food poisoning is there out there? Well, there are in England and Wales, about 630,000 cases a year reported. Now, of course, the question always is, well, are people going to report such an infection? If you're ill with food poisoning, don't you just sort of see it through and just stay at home and get over it? Well, actually with Campylobacter, as we'll see, one of the characteristic symptoms is quite severe stomach cramps. If you've had Campylobacter food poisoning, you'll know that. And it can be quite alarming. So you do tend to find reporting of Campylobacter is actually quite high, because people tend to go to the doctor because they think they're going to die. They think they've got this severe gut infection. And once they've had a fecal pot sample or an examination and it's found out to be Campylobacter, by the time they get the results, they're probably feeling a lot better. So reporting is actually quite good for Campylobacter. So the numbers probably do correlate with the number of cases, the number reported with the number of cases. But the number of foodborne infections is difficult to judge. The Food Standards Agency suggests that it's around 300,000 of the 630,000, but just less than 50% of cases reported are linked to food. So you can see that actually many of them will be contracted environmentally. Now, think about Campylobacter. It can cause infection in very low dose. In other words, you don't need many bacteria to cause infection. Now, if you've watched the videos on Salmonella or on E. coli 157, you'll know that for Salmonella, you need hundreds of thousands of bacteria to be ingested to cause infection, whereas E. coli 157, you probably require dozens maybe. So Campylobacter requires probably around 500 microorganisms, so it's easily contracted, but not as easy as E. coli 157. It also doesn't survive in the environment as well as E. coli 157. But unfortunately, it's more common than E. coli 157. So if you're doing top trumps cards on food poisoning bacteria, Campylobacter is significant because a lot of it causes quite distressing illness. Most people get over it really quickly, but it's easily transmissible because of the low infective dose. However, what makes it really come to the attention of the Food Standards Agency, why they want to bring in measures to try and reduce it down further, is the fact that it can cause post-infection complications. So people can end up with various disorders, such as Guillain-Barré syndrome, and you can get inflammatory bowel disease and things of this nature, which can be long-term conditions. So somebody who contracts Campylobacter food poisoning may get over that, but may be left with actually quite a debilitating condition for some years. So the clinical symptoms, I've already mentioned the abdominal pain, and it is that really characterises Campylobacter. But there are other symptoms: fever, diarrhea, headache, nausea, vomiting. Of course, it all depends on the individual. Different people get different symptoms, but the classic one is the gut ache. That's the one that really characterises it. How quickly do you get ill? Well, if you eat contaminated food or drink contaminated water or milk, whatever, you can get ill between 1 and 10 days. So it can actually be quite a little while after consumption. People tend to, when I've interviewed people as part of my job in the past on infectious disease investigations, what they've eaten, people tend to think that if they ate something the night before, that's what causes food poisoning. With Campylobacter, it could have been a week ago, quite plausibly, that you consumed something before the symptoms actually arise. I said earlier on, reporting's pretty good. The last intestinal infectious disease study that was performed suggested it was about 90% reporting. Of those, about 15% end up in hospital, but it's a short stay in hospital. Most people recover within a few days. Although, as I said, some people can be left with ongoing symptoms for years. So how do you prevent infection from Campylobacter? Well, at primary production, obviously use of potable drinking water to irrigate fruits and vegetables and things like that. Keeping animals away from crops, so particularly ready-to-eat crops like lettuces or something of that nature. Making sure that there is adequate systems in place to prevent cross-contamination, particularly between poultry and ready-to-eat foods at the primary production. Primary production, there is another video on that, but perhaps I should explain. Primary production refers to things like farming. So it's actually on the farm itself what measures should be in place to prevent Campylobacter. Remember, if a food is handled at primary level on the farm and it becomes contaminated, some foods will go through heat treatment. I'm not saying it's a good thing they're contaminated, but it's not the end of the world because the heat treatment may well deal with that. But some foods, like lettuces and raspberries and strawberries, may not, well, they won't be further processed. They might be washed, but you only need 500 Campylobacter microorganisms to cause food poisoning. So unless the washing is absolutely vigorous and thorough, and with a raspberry, that's going to be a challenge, you may get residual bacteria on that fruit. So it's really important that standards of hygiene at the farm level, primary production, are maintained. Heat treatment, as I said, Campylobacter easily killed. So there's no question of that. It starts getting distressed in the lower 50 degrees. So the populations, even if you've got a relatively large population of Campylobacter in a food, normal pasteurization temperatures, normal catering temperatures will adequately deal with it. So why do we get so many infections, particularly from takeaway premises? Well, it's the cross-contamination or cross-contact for our American viewers. So it's the contamination of food after it's been cooked. That's the problem. So it's techniques and practices. The Food Standards Agency ran some awareness campaigns over the last few years about not washing poultry prior to use. Some people can't help it. They get a chicken and they'll wash it. Now what you're doing is the chicken may well have Campylobacter on it. So by washing it, you're probably spraying the Campylobacter around your kitchen. If you're in a commercial kitchen, you may be spraying your Campylobacter onto equipment, onto surfaces, onto food handlers, who then go on to handle ready-to-eat foods. That's how cross-contamination can occur. So to prevent cross-contamination from foods like poultry, which is the most likely source in a catering environment, raw poultry, it's making sure food handlers are trained. They understand the issue. They know why they should be handling raw food carefully, why they should be washing their hands after handling raw food, and certainly washing their hands before handling ready-to-eat food, why they shouldn't be washing raw chickens. But also consumers need to be better informed, because whilst I'm pointing a finger at catering establishments, we're all very capable of poisoning ourselves and then blaming someone else for it. So washing chickens in the home environment is just as dangerous as washing it in a catering environment. So raising awareness amongst consumers is often key as well. Okay, so there we are. That's another video completed, another 1 out of 100. So there's 99 to watch if you want to. Please join me for the next one if you can. Thank you for watching.